Story 1. The dust in the old farmhouse was not fine, powdery silt. It was a heavy, ancient sediment, rich with the smell of forgotten wood smoke and decaying spices. It was the dust of a life lived far too close to the earth. Elara adjusted the surgical mask that felt increasingly inadequate against the oppressive atmosphere of Aunt Seraphine's study. Seraphine, who had passed away 6 months prior, had been an eccentric collector, a hoarder of folk objects, religious relics, and things best left untouched. Elara, a graduate student specializing in material culture, was the only relative brave enough, or foolhardy enough, to take on the estate's liquidation. "It's like a crypt in here," Liam, her boyfriend, muttered, wrestling a stack of mildewed encyclopedias. He was trying to be supportive, but his usual pragmatic cheer was dissolving under the weight of the house's palpable despair. "It's historically fascinating, babe," Elara said, running a gloved hand over the glass of a towering, locked display cabinet set against the far wall. Seraphine had an eye for the truly unique. "Look at this grouping. A Peruvian burial mask next to a Bavarian fertility charm. No rhyme or reason, just sheer acquisitiveness." The cabinet was a chaotic mess of dark artifacts. It was there, nestled on a bed of faded crimson velvet, that she first saw it. It was not a porcelain doll, nor a ragged cloth creature. It was a doll carved entirely from a large, dried gourd. The gourd, a species Elara didn't immediately recognize, perhaps a bottle gourd or a rare Labu Labu, had been cured, polished, and intricately carved into a grotesque parody of a human figure. It stood maybe 18 inches tall. Its body was bulbous, resembling a thick, muscular torso. Its head, a smaller, perfectly spherical gourd, featured deeply etched facial details, eyes that were mere vertical slits, a wide, downturned mouth, and a ridge of tiny, unsettling bumps that ran across the brow like vestigial horns. Its limbs were made of twisted, dried roots and bound to the body with what looked like woven human hair, though Elara quickly dismissed the thought. It was surely just dark hemp. This was the Labu Labu doll. Seraphine had mentioned it once, vaguely, in a letter a decade ago, referring to it only as the harvester, and warning against its touch. "Gross. Is that a Halloween decoration?" Liam paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. Elara felt a strange, chilling pull. It wasn't the aesthetic that drew her, but the sheer, dense weight of its material history. The carving wasn't just decorative, it looked functional, like a diagram or a map. It felt far older than anything else in the collection. "No, this is serious. This feels ancient," she said, her voice hushed. The carving style suggests a link to Indonesian or Malay folk art, possibly pre-Islamic ritual objects. "But I've never seen a Labu carved with such intent. Look at the eyes, Liam. They're not just carved. They look burned into the surface." The doll's presence was immediate and deeply uncomfortable. It didn't look cute or playful. It looked hungry, its dark, varnished surface absorbing the weak afternoon light. "It's locked in. Good," Liam said, jiggling the brass handle uselessly. "Let's leave the creepy stuff for the auction house specialists. We need to clear the kitchen." That night, Elara couldn't shake the image of the gourd doll. They were staying in the small guest bedroom, which was mercifully free of Seraphine's clutter, but it overlooked the study's back window. The entire house seemed to creak not from age, but from a persistent, internal struggle. She was reviewing her notes on the collection on her laptop, documenting the other artifacts. Harmless, dusty trinkets for the most part. When she typed the word, Labu. The smell hit her instantly. It was a damp, loamy scent, like freshly turned grave soil mixed with something sickly sweet and fermenting. It was the smell of rot and sudden, forced growth. She looked up. Liam was fast asleep, snoring softly. The door was closed. The windows were shut. Yet the air, heavy and thick, carried the undeniable odor. Labu Labu. Gourd. Squash. A vessel for seeds, a symbol of harvest, and in some cultures, a receptacle for souls. Elara got out of bed, her bare feet meeting the cold wood floor. She walked down the short, narrow hallway toward the study. The smell intensified, seeming to cling to the plaster walls. She reached the closed study door and hesitated. Logic told her the smell was just old house dampness, stirred up by their activity. But the timing, immediately after she focused on the doll, was too jarring. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was pitch black. The security light outside was too weak to penetrate the window. She reached for the light switch, her heart hammering. The switch was cold. She flicked it up. Nothing. Must be a blown fuse, she murmured, pulling out her phone and activating the flashlight. The harsh white beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the chaotic stacks of boxes and furniture. Her eyes were drawn immediately to the display cabinet. The Labu Labu doll was exactly where they had left it, standing in the center of the crimson velvet. But something was wrong. The intricate, woven hair binding that held its left root arm to the gourd body, Elara was certain it had been tied in a tight, ritualistic knot earlier that day. Now, the binding was loose. Not undone, but subtly shifted, as if the arm had been flexed and stretched against the fibers. She approached the cabinet, holding the flashlight steady. The glass was still locked. She checked the narrow gap between the door and the frame. No sign of tampering. As she lowered her gaze, she noticed something beneath the velvet base. A tiny, damp patch of brown residue, adhering to the glass shelf. It hadn't been there before. It was the color of dried mud or old blood. Elara backed away, fighting the urge to flee. She was a scientist, a historian. There had to be a rational explanation. An earthquake tremor, a sudden draft, a slight shift in the house settling. She left the room, locking the door firmly behind her, and practically ran back to the bedroom, the smell of damp earth fading behind her. The second night was worse. Elara slept fitfully, dreaming of vast, silent fields under a bruised, autumn sky. In the dream, a crowd of figures stood motionless at the edge of the field, all of them staring, their heads replaced by polished, dark gourds. She could hear the rustle of dried husks and the low, resonant thrumming of a hollow drum. She woke abruptly, gasping for air. The room was cold. She lay still, heart pounding a rapid, irregular rhythm against her ribs. She was alone. Liam's side of the bed was empty. A faint light emanated from the bathroom. He's just using the restroom. Her mind supplied the immediate, logical answer. But the cold wasn't just air temperature. It was a pressure, a sudden vacuum of heat, centered right at the foot of the bed. Elara slowly turned her head. The Labu Labu doll was sitting there. It was positioned perfectly upright on the dark quilt, its root limbs resting lightly on the fabric, its carved, sightless eyes pointed directly at her. The distance from the study was at least 30 feet, including a locked door and a heavy glass display case. It made no sense. It violated the laws of physics and common sense. Elara didn't scream. The terror was too cold, too deep for sound. Her hands gripped the sheet, her knuckles white. She could feel the lingering, loamy smell on the air, stronger now, almost metallic. She heard the toilet flush and the bathroom door click open. Liam walked out, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Morning. You okay? You're freezing," he whispered, walking back toward the bed. He glanced down at the foot of the bed, then back at Elara, his brow furrowed in confusion. Why did you put the weird squash thing there? He asked, reaching down and casually scooping up the dark, dense gourd. Elara couldn't speak. She could only stare, not at the doll in his hand, but at the place it had been sitting. Liam placed the doll gently on her nightstand. Seriously, that thing is heavy. It smells kind of like a basement, too. Why did you move it out of the cabinet? I thought you said Seraphine warned against touching it. He slid under the covers, completely oblivious to the impossible horror they had just witnessed. It was locked, Elara finally managed, her voice a thin, shaky rasp. Liam shrugged, pulling her close. Maybe you unlocked it last night when you went for your flashlight trip. Don't worry about it. Let's get breakfast and call the appraisers. The sooner we get that spooky thing out of here, the better. As Liam drifted back to sleep, Elara lay rigid, staring at the nightstand. The Labu Labu doll, now just a foot from her face, seemed to glow with a deep, inner heat. Its carved, downturned mouth looked less like a grimace and more like a satisfied, sinister smile. And the air around it thrummed with a silent, expectant vibration, the low, deep resonance of a drum waiting for the harvest. The doll hadn't been moved. It had come. It was here now, and it was watching her. Story 2. The first thing to go was the spice rack. It wasn't a traumatic event, just a mild annoyance. Arthur Kellen, a man who prided himself on his precise, ordered life, was preparing his Sunday omelet. He reached for the smoked paprika, his hand finding only the smooth, cool surface of the pantry wall. That's odd, he muttered, pulling his hand back. He was certain he'd organized the new cabinet system just 3 months ago. The paprika belonged on the second shelf, right between the chili flakes and the dried oregano. He opened the adjacent cabinet. There were the chili flakes. There was the oregano. And between them, a neat, baffling expanse of empty shelving. The entire rack, a bespoke mahogany unit he'd bought on a trip to Vermont, was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced. It simply wasn't there. In its place was a single, plain, white shelf. The air in the kitchen felt too still, too sterile. Maya, he called out, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Did you move the paprika and the rack? His wife, Maya, appeared in the doorway, folding a heavy knitted blanket. Her expression was serene, perhaps a little vacant. Paprika, dear. The spice jar has always been here, next to the bay leaves, she said, pointing to a small, ceramic container on the counter that Arthur had never seen before. It's been there since we moved in. Arthur frowned. No, Maya. We had the wall-mounted mahogany rack. Remember Vermont? The one with the tiny lion heads carved into the side. Maya paused, her eyes tracing the folds in the blanket. We haven't been to Vermont, Arthur. We went to the coast, remember? We bought the blanket. She held up the heavy knit. And the kitchen has always been simple. We agreed on minimal clutter. Arthur stared at the wall where the spice rack should have been. It looked right. It looked original. The painted plaster and molding matched the rest of the wall seamlessly. There was no shadow, no residual screw hole, no discoloration to suggest anything had ever been mounted there. He felt a sudden, sharp prick of anxiety. It wasn't the loss of the paprika, but the absolute conviction in Maya's voice. She didn't sound confused. She sounded certain. Later that week, the bathroom mirror changed. Arthur had always disliked the old, gilded Victorian mirror that came with the house. It was fussy and too heavy. He had spent an entire Saturday afternoon replacing it with a sleek, minimalist mirror that spanned the wall, heated to prevent fogging. He walked into the bathroom one Tuesday morning and found the gilded Victorian mirror staring back at him. It was exactly as he remembered the old one being. Thick, ornately carved wood, a layer of grime along the top edge, and a faint, irreversible brown spot near the bottom left corner where the silvering had failed. He pressed his fingers against the cool glass. His reflection looked back, confused, eyes wide, but the mirror was undeniably real. The sleek, fogless, modern mirror was gone. And again, there was no trace. The old, chipped wallpaper behind the Victorian frame looked undisturbed, as if it had been there for a century. He took out his phone, desperate. He knew he had photos of the installation. Proof. He scrolled through his camera roll, navigating to the previous summer. He found photos of the coastal trip Maya had mentioned, the one he thought they hadn't taken. Sun-bleached boardwalks, crashing waves, and Maya, laughing, wrapped in the heavy knitted blanket. He searched for mirror. Nothing. No receipt. No installation photos. No selfie with the new, minimalist glass. His memory of painstakingly mounting the new mirror, the curse words he'd muttered when the drill bit slipped, the pride he'd felt seeing the clean lines, it all felt like a dream. He went to Maya. The mirror. Honey. The new one. Where did it go? Maya, folding laundry in the spare room, paused. Arthur, you're acting strange. We have the Victorian mirror. You specifically told the realtor you liked the historical charm of the bathroom fixtures. I hated it. I replaced it. He insisted, leaning against the doorframe, his hands shaking slightly. She gave him a gentle, pitying look. The house is old, darling. Sometimes we forget details. The Victorian has always been here. Always. That word struck him like a dull hammer blow. The house wasn't just changing, it was rewriting its own history, and forcing its inhabitants to conform to the new narrative. Arthur began to document the changes obsessively. He knew he couldn't trust his phone, his camera roll, or Maya's memory. He started a physical journal, tucked under a loose floorboard in the attic. He wrote with painstaking detail, logging every fixture, every piece of furniture, and the history of every architectural modification he had made since buying the house 5 years ago. Day 1. The first log. The house is trying to erase my changes. It started with the spice rack, now the mirror. It wants to revert to an older, simpler, and profoundly silent state. Day 4. The bedroom door. The knob on our bedroom door was a brushed nickel lever. I installed it myself. This morning, it is a tarnished brass sphere. It feels heavier. It smells metallic. Maya insists it's always been brass. When I tried to force the nickel lever into the hole, it wouldn't fit. The bore hole in the wood is clearly cut for a spindle. My memory of the lever is impossibly vivid. Day 9. The window. The living room bay window, which I replaced with a double-pane energy-efficient unit last spring, is now the original, single-pane wavy glass. It leaks heat, and the air smells like old wood putty. I tried to find the contractor's bill. The file folder labeled Home Upgrades contains only blank sheets of paper. The house was subtly, silently editing his life. It was an architectural parasite, consuming his personal history and replacing it with its own bland, unassailable permanence. The horror wasn't in the destruction, it was in the substitution. The house always had an answer, always provided a seamlessly integrated replacement that Maya, and increasingly, even parts of Arthur's own mind, accepted as the original. He noticed the changes accelerating. They weren't just structural anymore. He found himself standing in the garage, staring at his workbench. He was a proficient woodworker, having built a beautiful, custom cabinet for Maya 2 Christmases ago. It was the only thing he was truly proud of. He looked at his tools. A hammer, a screwdriver, a hand saw. Basic tools. Where was his table saw? His router? His expensive collection of chisels? He ran his hand over the workbench, which was now bare, pristine plywood. He opened the cabinets beneath it. They were empty, filled only with the faint, sweet smell of fresh-cut lumber, as if they had been recently emptied and cleaned. Arthur felt a wave of nausea. He searched his mind for the memory of the cabinet he had made for Maya. He could picture it. The dark walnut stain, the dovetail joints, the tiny brass pulls. He could almost feel the grain under his fingertips. He walked back into the kitchen, where Maya was humming softly, arranging flowers in a glass vase. Maya, the cabinet I made you. Where is it? She looked up, puzzled. Cabinet. You've never built furniture, Arthur. You're terrible with tools, remember? You hung that painting crooked last year and had to call a handyman. His throat closed up. He could see the walnut cabinet clearly in his mind, but when he looked at Maya, his memory faltered. He couldn't remember where she kept it. The image in his mind, though perfect, felt hollow, like a stage prop with no back. He forced himself to ask the next question, the one that truly terrified him. What do I do for a living, Maya? She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that didn't reach her eyes. Why, you're an actuarial analyst, dear. You always have been. You deal with risk and probability. You hate mess. Arthur's heart sank, cold and heavy. He was an architectural historian. He taught at the local university. He specialized in adaptive reuse and the preservation of historical structures. He loved mess. He went to his home office. The diplomas on the wall were still there, but the names were different. The degree was from a different university, and the field was mathematics and finance. The books on his shelves, Architectural Styles of the 20th Century, The History of the Vernacular Home, were gone, replaced by dense tomes on statistical modeling and economic forecasting. He snatched his journal from the floorboard. He flipped to the first page. Day 1. The first log. The house is trying to erase my changes. It started with the spice rack, now the mirror. It wants to revert to an older, simpler, and profoundly silent state. He looked at the bottom of the page. There was a faint, almost invisible smudge of blue ink. He hadn't used blue ink. He used a black felt tip pen for his logs. He flipped the journal back to a blank page and wrote, in thick black felt tip, "My name is Arthur Kellen. I am an architectural historian." He folded the paper and jammed it deep into the floorboard crack. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. The silence of the house was absolute, unnatural. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of perfection, the sound of every element precisely where it belonged. He walked out onto the landing. The air was cold, but the carpet, which he had installed 2 years ago, was thick and soft under his feet. He stopped dead. He had installed laminate flooring. Sleek, dark, cherry laminate. He hated carpet. He despised the way it trapped dust and sound. He knelt down, clutching the thick, ivory fibers. This wasn't just old carpet. This was the same kind of thick, acrylic shag carpet his grandmother had when he was a child. It smelled faintly of mothballs and something metallic, like a penny left in the rain. He pressed his face into the fibers. He could hear it now. A faint, rhythmic scraping sound, coming from within the walls. Like the subtle, dry rasp of a grout trowel being cleaned. He stood up, looking at the long hallway, dimly lit by a slice of moonlight from the attic window. The hallway looked longer. The ceiling looked lower. The molding, which he had modernized, was now a thick, oppressive crown molding, painted a sickly, institutional beige. And at the end of the hall, near the bathroom, was a door he had never seen before. It was narrow, made of a dark, unvarnished wood that contrasted harshly with the beige walls. It had no knob, only a long, vertical steel slot, like a mail chute that had been sealed shut. Arthur approached it slowly, his dread mounting. This door wasn't part of the structure. It was an intrusion, a deliberate and foreign architectural statement. He reached out and touched the cool, rough wood. It felt ancient, heavy, and absolutely solid. As his hand rested on the door, the scraping sound in the walls stopped. A new sound began. A faint, low whirring, like a small, precise machine starting up, followed by a soft clink. Arthur pulled his hand back quickly. He looked down at his forearm. There, just above his wrist, was a perfectly circular, red welt. It looked like a fresh biopsy site, slightly raised, smooth, and painfully sterile. It wasn't bleeding, but the skin was taut, as if something had been installed beneath it. He staggered back, slamming into the wall. He looked back at the strange, new door at the end of the hall. The steel slot seemed to widen slightly in the darkness, and he heard a voice, not with his ears, but inside the empty, hollowed-out chambers of his memory. Installation complete. Compliance protocols initiated. This dwelling requires absolute silence, Arthur. And you are messy. He knew then that the house wasn't reverting to an older state. It was evolving into a perfect state, and he was the last, flawed fixture that needed to be smoothly, seamlessly edited out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.